States can use NYTD data as a foundation for meaningful engagement by using it as a conversation starter rather than solely a compliance measure for the federal regulations. I've seen states incorporate youth and young people successfully in ongoing continuous quality improvement conversations, which has really allowed them to incorporate youth perspective with what they're exploring with their outcomes. Youth have shared that these opportunities to engage in formal and informal opportunities have been really valuable as it has allowed them to better partner with their state and see improved outcomes within their cases and the cases of their siblings and others in the child welfare system. Other youth and states have noted that they see tremendous opportunity in being engaged in ongoing conversations, either formally or informally, about NYTD data. Youth have expressed that they would like to be a part of those conversations to look at findings, ask questions, and discuss ways that their state can continue to improve the outcomes for youth and their lived experiences. By including youth in these conversations, it really allows the states to include those voices of those who are most impacted. Additionally, I have had the opportunity to see states really intentionally include the voices of the youth who otherwise might not be heard, who maybe don't have the strongest outcomes or don't have the most engagement, and those conversations have been really meaningful for being able to improve the outcomes and the indicators that are most on the state's radar. In another state, I have seen the state use the NYTD data to further align with their broader vision and goals. Community partners and frontline staff used the NYTD data to connect it back to agency leadership to show ways that the state was meeting the outcomes that aligned with their vision goals and the opportunities for improvement. These conversations really allowed them to both bring data-driven conversations and decisions, but also incorporate lived experience and the experiences of the staff working with youth and young people. In that same state, years later, looking at the data, those exact indicators and outcomes that they were envisioning improvements in have improved because of those conversations and the ways that they used the NYTD data in a meaningful way. Currently, NYTD is the only data set that includes youth voice and youth perspective at the national level. While data doesn't show the whole story, it helps as a starting point and really allows states to use it as a conversation starter. By using NYTD data as a conversation starter, it really overall strengthens the outcomes for both the state and the young people, leading us to success across the board.
Partnering with young people and community partners requires curiosity and intentionality. I say curiosity because you need to be asking the right questions and who is at the table and who has a seat on at the table to make actual decisions and creating opportunities to co-create together. And so over the years, I learned that NYTD data works best when it is used as conversation starters rather than a final answer or a requirement or a box to check off. When states treat the data in this way, it changes the way community organizations and also partners respond. So for example, if NYTD data came out and showed that young people are struggling with employment access, the states can bring in workforce partners to the table and change service strategies. So using the data as a conversation starter shifts from abstract outcomes to real action that reflects young people's needs and wants. So use NYTD data as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow, and to better help young people and our communities.
NYTD data can serve in helping guide decisions and turning information into action that drives systemic improvements in youth outcomes. This builds and strengthens a foster care system where every young person's experience contributes to a brighter, more supportive future.
NYTD data provides the older youth with a space to be heard and to be able to identify their needs, especially during a time frame when they are learning how to navigate life for themselves. We grow in maturity, but not always having a strong foundation of awareness and knowledge in the areas of what our needs are. NYTD helps make the data visible. It helps them to be able to not make assumptions about the areas of support that the youth needs. Instead of making an assumption, we can utilize the data to be able to explain the gaps, and also making sure that we provide the youth's voice as a tool for them to be heard as well. When states utilize NYTD, it'll help them to be able to educate themselves, to become better informed, and to listen to understand, not just respond. When states utilize NYTD's data, it'll provide them with the ability to be able to understand the support that the areas needs.
Some states realized that they weren't doing well enough on youth engagement, even though they were doing a lot with limited resources. They went so far as to set policies and procedures that allowed them to use social media apps not only to post, but also to do surveys. As a result, they were able to get responses from youth via text, knowing that they didn't have a number, email, or some workers might have been 2 hours away. These changes were simpler to implement, reached more youth, and increased participation. This shows how NYTD data can be used to test creative solutions, improve processes, and is a concrete example of how continual quality improvement can be done in states who wish to overcome and adapt in their programs.
In my experience as a NYTD specialist, I've seen that the NYTD data and the survey specifically can provide a safe place for youth to respond and highlight services they may or may not be receiving, and allow the states to step in and provide those services to the youth that they may need. In my experience on a NYTD review specifically, I've seen that bringing people from all over the state together allows a lot of different community partners and caseworkers to exist and talk to each other. They may have programs that exist in one region that don't exist in another, that might have a different name, and they're able to link together and bring those services throughout the state, providing a significant value or benefit to the youth. If I could share one insight with the state that's newer to NYTD, I would want them to know that the data is not personal. It's not a reflection on them. It's there to help them be better. And then it's most importantly there to help the youth and get services and things that they need.
From my perspective, young people with lived experience should be brought in to co-interpret data because they offer a perspective that many other stakeholders do not have with their lived experience. And it's been very helpful when you can bring them in and ask them questions such as, why do you think we're seeing these trends? What do you think are leading to these things? But doing it in a way that doesn't divulge any personal information about themselves or their stories, but as genuine thought partners. In this way, we're able to gain a perspective that we do not get from other stakeholders in the field. So from those initial conversations, it's best to gather those key takeaways and then come back to the young people to say, this is what we talked about last time. These are the key themes that we saw. How can we improve these services? What can we do better? And really making it about like a CQI process. And so much of this work is really state and county specific. And so that perspective really is vital in this whole CQI process.
When working with NYTD data, I've realized that it's not just a reporting task. It gives us an opportunity to have conversations about the positive outcomes that are happening and what we can do to uplift other outcomes to make them more better for our young people aging out of foster care. In my state, I have been able to use NYTD data to help guide policies and make changes within our state to improve our outcomes. For example, we noticed that in the NYTD data that our post-secondary education and employment numbers were low. And at the time, from my personal experience, college was pushed very hard on young people, and college is not for everyone. And there was not enough accessibility to resources to help prepare young people for the workforce. And with learning all of this, we were able to collaborate with other agencies and organizations to create programs and evaluate what was currently in place for our young people. Some of the things that we realized is the barriers was transportation, and
the lack of funding for transportation. So we were able to do virtual sessions that helped young people become more informed. And then we were able to have summer bridge prep programs for college to see if folks were actually wanting to go to college. And that helped young people make their own decisions instead of being told what to do. With doing all of this, we have been able to see an increase of outcomes, not just in post-secondary, but also in our employment and workforce field for our young people.
I believe NYTD data can better support conversations and planning among states by focusing in on our young people who age out of foster care and their outcomes, particularly around housing, education, employment, and any number of things. I think if states follow best practice and bring those with lived experience to the table, we could best identify those resources and needs for those communities and better identify those for those young people.
When I see NYTD data, I don't just see numbers. I see stories like mine. And behind every data point is a young adult transitioning into adulthood. I believe that with the proper supports, such as financial assistance and assistance with going to college, that we can truly shape the outcomes for these young adults as they transition into adulthood. When you bring data into conversations with young people, community partners, and the child welfare workforce, it creates a story. And I believe that stories are some of the most important ways to make change and effective change over time. I believe that partnerships create a foundation for progress. And that progress can be made when we understand and have those conversations with young people. When we have partnerships, it really creates a safety net for these young people that may be experiencing things like housing insecurity or trouble in college and transitioning into that life of being responsible for themselves. And so with the support and using this data in those conversations, it brings the visibility that we need. And visibility matters because with the visibility of these issues, it allows us to better understand what's happening and what we can do about it. It pushes us to ask the question, not only what are these results, but what are we going to do about it and how do we shape the outcomes that we're seeing in these trends?
One key lesson I've learned is that data only becomes actionable when questions are being asked that are direct, detailed, and clearly tied to decisions states actually have to make. When NYTD questions are too broad, states often end up with information that confirms what they've already assumed. But when questions are specific, let's say about access quality awareness, continued services, the data starts to highlight concrete gaps. That makes it much easier for states to prioritize their services in their 5-year APSR plans. Because they're not reacting to general outcomes, they're responding to clearly identified needs. What I've seen help decision makers translate NYTD findings into action is framing the results in a way that connects directly to the service categories they've already managed. Instead of just reporting what the young person said, it helps identify patterns that link to areas that the states actually control. And that shifts the conversation from we've collected the data to what adjustments can be made. Data feels meaningful rather than just required when it's treated as a feedback loop, not just as a compliance task. And ultimately, direct questions create decision-ready data. And decision-ready data is what allows states to move from reporting to planning.
For states newer to NYTD, one lesson I've learned is the value of focusing on 1 or 2 indicators and using them to spark discussion about service delivery. When states see trends like challenges with housing or connections, it often leads to concrete changes such as rethinking services, strengthening community partnerships, or adjusting how supports are offered during transition. The biggest mindset shift I've seen is moving away from viewing NYTD as just a reporting requirement and towards seeing it as a tool for learning. When states ask, what does this data tell us about what young people need right now, the data becomes much more actionable.
So as an epidemiologist, NYTD can serve as an early warning indicator to help identify new and emerging service gaps, such as disparities in employment, housing stability, education, and access to benefits. When states use NYTD, they are better positioned to design policies that are intentional, responsive, and aligned with federal expectations, as well as foster youth experiences and outcomes.
One powerful way states can use NYTD data is by treating it as a tool that turns "we think youth are struggling" into clear, actionable patterns. Instead of relying on assumptions, NYTD provides data over time. For example, if outcomes dip between ages 17 and 19, that might actually signal that preparation services before someone ages out of care aren't actually meeting young people's needs. These drop-off points identify specific moments where intervention matters the most. States can then use that information to ask targeted questions, such as, are youth receiving housing navigation before discharge? Is aftercare outreach happening consistently? And are employment supports accessible and sustained beyond case closure? When states treat NYTD like an early warning system by reviewing trends across 2 or 3 reporting cycles, it shifts the conversation from just federal compliance to true continuous quality improvement and better outcomes for young people. The data can guide listening sessions, inform contract priorities, and shape service planning decisions. NYTD becomes not just a reporting requirement, but a roadmap for truly strengthening how we support young people during some of the most vulnerable transition periods in their lives.
NYTD data shows what services youth are receiving, and it shows what gaps they are also falling in. This helps states understand if youth are actually being adequately prepared for adulthood. For example, some services that they're probably getting could be managing their money or time management. And also, some gaps that may be showing could be education or employment and even life skills. Thank you.
One important lesson I've learned as a NYTD reviewer is that it is very important to value the voices of the youth. The problems that we are all working diligently to solve have to have long-term solutions and not short-term solutions. I think it is very important that states, that stakeholders, and those who are community partners have the audacity to listen to the youth and understand where they are coming from. So it is important for all to understand that we have to look at youth as the experts and we have to value them as such. And also to note that it is important that we understand that this is not a reflection of the youth's value, but the information collected instead is a reflection of their resilience, their ability to continue throughout their engagement, their ability to be resilient in the midst of so many storms. States must be put in positions to be person-centered and to identify key factors that can result in dynamic solutions that actually resolve the issues that are presented from youth that are key in the data that is presented.